She came for the paintings on the first morning of the frost, and she came with men. I was sergeant of the long gallery watch that season, which is a plain way of saying I stood 8 hours a day in a corridor of dead faces and answered to no one but the captain and the corridor itself. The long gallery of the Palace of Harrogate runs the whole northern length of the old wing, 200 paces of oak and gilt, and along its inner wall hang the portraits of the house going back further than any living memory. Kings in armor, queens in coronation velvet, children who grew up to be neither, painted stiff and solemn in clothes that must have itched them terribly. I had memorized them the way a man memorizes the ceiling above his own bed. I could have told you, blindfolded, which frame came after which, and whose gloved hand rested on whose shoulder, and where the light fell at 4 in the afternoon when the low sun found the western windows. And I could have told you, without turning my head, exactly where the 3 portraits of the late Queen Isolde hung, because they were the only place in that whole gallery of frozen faces where anyone ever stopped to breathe. There were 3. The great state portrait near the center, Isolde crowned, one hand on the arm of a carved chair, her chin lifted the particular half-inch that the painter had clearly begged her to lift, and that she had clearly refused for most of the sitting. A smaller one further down, Isolde younger before the crown, laughing at something out of frame with her whole face, which the court thought too informal for a gallery, and which the king had hung there anyway. And a third, the quiet one near the far door, Isolde with a boy of perhaps 4 on her knee, and the boy was Rowan, and the queen was looking not at the painter but at her son, and the painter had been wise enough to let her. That is the one Morwenna wanted down first. I know because that is the one she pointed at. She arrived without warning, which was itself a message. The Queen Consort did not usually walk the north wing. It was cold and it was old and it belonged, in the way that stone belongs to the dead, to the woman who had come before her. But that morning she came sweeping in from the state stair with her skirts hissing over the boards and 4 men of the household staff trailing her, and 2 of them carried the long padded poles and the coils of soft rope that the palace uses when it takes a heavy thing off a wall. She had brought the tools. She had planned this at her writing desk, the way a general plans a small clean war he expects to win before breakfast. I brought my heels together and I did not move otherwise, because a man of the guard does not move otherwise, and she stopped in front of me the way people stop in front of a locked gate, with the mild surprise of someone who has never once in her life found a gate locked. Sergeant, she did not know my name, she had no reason to. Have your men clear the corridor. My people have work here. Ma'am, I kept my eyes forward on the far window, which is where they are trained to stay. May I ask what work? I felt her attention sharpen. It is a physical thing, being looked at by someone who is deciding whether you are furniture or an obstacle. Furniture she could have ignored. An obstacle she had to address. You may not in the ordinary way, she said, and her voice was pleasant, which was worse than if it had not been. But I'll tell you so we understand each other from the start. These 3. She lifted one hand ungloved, the rings very bright in the cold light, and she pointed the state portrait, the laughing one, and last, deliberately last, the one with the boy on her knee. They come down today. They're to be crated and taken to the West Stores. The gallery is being rehung. The theme is the living house, not a mausoleum. Behind her the 4 men had set down their poles and were waiting, and one of them, the older one, would not look at the portraits at all, which told me he knew exactly what he had been brought here to do and did not love it. The living house, I said, not a question, just the words laid down flat so she would hear them come back to her. The king's house as it is now, she said, as it will go forward. My children hang in the east wing with the schoolroom pictures like an afterthought, and a dead woman has the whole north light to herself. She said dead woman the way you would say damp, a condition of the building, an inconvenience of drains. It's morbid, Sergeant. It's unhealthy for the young ones to grow up walking past a shrine. Now, Clear your men and stand aside and let me set my own husband's house to rights." And there it was, the order, given cleanly, given by the Queen Consort of the realm in the king's own palace, to a sergeant of the guard whose entire life was built on the granite understanding that when the crown speaks, the guard obeys. I want to be honest about that morning, because I have told this story many times since, and I have watched men decide before I reached the end that I was some rare brave soul who saw the right of it at a glance and never wavered. That is not true, and it does the thing a disservice. I wavered. For the length of one held breath I stood there, and every instinct that 30 years of service had hammered into me said the same 3 words. She is the crown. My knees wanted to bend. My hand wanted to come up to the poles and help. It is a terrible feeling to have your whole training push you toward a thing your gut has gone cold against, and to have only 1 second in which to choose which of them you will betray. What saved me was not courage, it was a piece of paper. 6 weeks before that frost, on an ordinary gray afternoon, the Crown Prince had come to the long gallery alone. This was unusual enough that I remember every step of it. Rowan was a young man then, 24, not yet the weight he would become, and he had his mother's way of stopping to breathe in front of the quiet portrait by the far door. He stood there a long while. Then he had come to me, sought me out, the sergeant of the watch, which princes do not do, and he had said a thing I did not fully understand at the time. "Sergeant, if anyone ever comes to take these 3 down." He had not said who. He had not needed to. We both stood in a palace, and a palace is a place where everyone knows exactly which storm is on the horizon and no one says its name aloud. "If anyone ever comes for my mother's portraits on any authority short of the king's own hand or mine, in person, you are to refuse. You are to keep them on the wall. And you are to tell whoever it is that you hold a standing order from the Crown Prince. Say it in exactly those words. Will you do that for me?" I had asked him because a guard is allowed to ask, when the order is strange, whether he would put it in writing so that I should have something to stand on if the day came. And he had smiled, that tired smile that was so much older than his face, and he had taken a card from his coat and written on it in his own square hand, and signed it, and given it to me, and I had carried it folded in the breast of my tunic every day since, over the heart, where a man keeps the things that decide him. So when Morwenna said, "Clear your men and stand aside," my hand did not go to the poles. It went to my breast, and rested there a moment. On the card I could feel through the wool, and the cold second passed, and I heard my own voice come out level and low and entirely certain, the way a voice does when it has stopped arguing with itself. "I'm sorry, ma'am. These 3 stay where they are. I have orders from the Crown Prince." I do not think in the whole length of her life anyone had ever said the word no to Morwenna and made it mean something. Displeasure she knew. Delay she knew, the slow, apologetic obstruction of servants who are afraid of 2 masters at once and try to please neither. But a flat, quiet, immovable no from a man in a corridor, with his eyes still forward and his heels still together, that she did not have a shelf to put on. For a moment her face did the thing faces do when the ground under a word gives way. Then it closed, smooth as a shut drawer. "You have orders," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." "From the Crown Prince?" "Yes, ma'am. Standing orders. That these 3 portraits are to remain on this wall unless the order to move them comes from the king in his own hand, or from the Crown Prince in person." "The Crown Prince," she said, and now the pleasantness was gone and something colder had come up under it, "is at the hunting lodge in the northern forests and will not return for 9 days. And I am the Queen Consort of this realm, standing here in person, telling you to move them. Do you understand the difference in weight between a boy's whim spoken 6 weeks ago and the living crown standing in front of you now?" "I understand it, ma'am." And I did. That was the hell of it. I understood the difference in weight perfectly, and I understood that by every ordinary reckoning she was right, and I stood there anyway. But the order I hold is specific, and it names this exact case, and it names you, not by your name, by the shape of the thing. He told me, If anyone comes for these three on any authority short of the king's hand or mine in person, you are that anyone, ma'am. I'm sorry. I'll not move them, and I'll not stand aside while your men do." The older servant, the one who had not looked at the portraits, made a small sound and looked at the floor. He, at least, understood that he was watching something that did not happen, a guard, in the king's palace, telling the Queen Consort no, and meaning it, and being right in some way none of us could yet fully see. Morwenna took one step closer. She was not a large woman, but she had learned somewhere the trick of making a room feel smaller when she chose, and she used it now. "Sergeant, look at me." A guard on post does not look, but there is a difference between the letter and the spirit of a thing, and there are moments when refusing to meet an eye is its own kind of cowardice, and I judged this one of them. I brought my eyes down from the far window, and I looked at the Queen Consort of the realm, and I let her see that there was a man behind the discipline, and that the man was not afraid of her, only sorry. "You are one sergeant," she said very quietly, so the servants would not hear the exact shape of the threat, only feel its cold. "You have a wage and lodgings your family lives in, and a pension you have not yet earned, and every single one of those things sits in the palm of my hand. I could have you off this post before the noon bell. I could have you out the tradesman's gate before your supper. All I want is 3 ugly reminders taken off a wall, and I am giving you the chance, the only chance you will get, to be a sensible man and help me and go home tonight with your life intact. Or you can be a hero in a corridor for 9 days, and then the prince comes home to find you already gone and your family already turned out, and no one will remember your little stand at all. Now, which is it?" And I will tell you what I felt, standing there, because it is the truest part of the whole account and the part men skip when they make me brave. I felt afraid. Not of her, exactly, of the machinery behind her, the wage and the lodgings and the pension and the noon bell, the whole quiet weight of a household that could crush a sergeant flat and never feel the bump. I have a wife. I had that winter a daughter of 11 and a boy of 8, and they slept in 3 rooms over the mews that came with the post, and I stood in that cold gallery and I saw those rooms empty and my children's things on a cart, and I understood that Morwenna was not bluffing. She could do every word of it. That is what made her dangerous. She did not threaten what she could not deliver. But over my heart there was a folded card, and on the card, in a young man's square hand, were words I had read so many times I could see them with my eyes open. And under the words, though I had not understood it at the time, was a promise, his and now, because I had taken the card, mine. "I understand what you can do to me, ma'am," I said. "I don't doubt a word of it. And I'm asking you to do it if you must, because I'll not move these portraits, not for the noon bell and not for the tradesman's gate. I hold an order from the crown, and the order is no." For one held breath. The long gallery was so quiet I could hear the frost ticking in the old glass of the western windows, and the far portrait of Isolde looked down at her son on her knee, and neither of them moved, and neither did I. Then Morwenna smiled, and it was not a warm thing, and she said, "Very well," which are the 2 most dangerous words a powerful person can say, because they never mean surrender. They mean the first plan has failed and the second is already moving. She turned to her men. "Leave the poles. We won't be needing them today." A glance back at me, light now, almost amused, as if the whole exchange had been a diverting little test I had somehow passed and failed at once. "You've bought your dead queen 9 days, Sergeant. Enjoy them. I'll be back with a piece of paper of my own, and rather more weight behind it than a card in a boy's handwriting. And when I come back, you'll wish you'd used the poles yourself." She swept out the way she had come, skirts hissing, and the 4 men gathered up their ropes and filed after her, and the last of them, the older one who had not looked at the portraits, paused at the door and looked at me at last. He did not say anything. He just gave me a small nod. The nod one working man gives another when he has watched him do a hard thing and does not have the words. And then he was gone. and I was alone in the long gallery with 200 dead faces and 3 portraits of a woman who had been kinder to the guard than any queen before or since. And I let out the breath I had been holding for what felt like an hour, and found my hands were shaking. I want to say I stood there tall and proud. I did not. I stood there and shook, and I thought of my daughter's things on a cart, and I very nearly went after Morwenna to tell her I had reconsidered. The only thing that kept me on my post was the post itself. The simple animal fact that a guard on duty does not leave his duty, not for fear and not for anything. And so I stayed because staying was the one instruction my body still knew how to follow when my mind had gone to pieces. That was the first morning. There were 8 more before the prince came home, and Morwenna, I learned very quickly, had not been idle in her defeat. The captain of the guard sent for me that same afternoon. Captain Renford was a fair man and a tired one, 3 years from his own pension, and he had spent his whole career learning the one lesson the palace teaches hardest, which is that the safest place to stand is exactly in the middle, offending no one. He had me in his little stone office off the guardroom, and he had a paper on his desk, and he would not look at me any more easily than the old servant had looked at the portraits. "Sergeant, I've had a note from the Queen Consort's household." He tapped the paper. "It says you refused a direct instruction from Her Majesty this morning, in the North Gallery, refused and were insolent." He looked up. "Were you insolent?" "No, sir, I was sorry. I said so more than once, but I refused, yes. She ordered 3 portraits taken down and I told her they'd stay." "On whose authority did you tell her that?" "The Crown Prince's, sir. I had the card in my tunic and I nearly drew it, and then some instinct stopped my hand, and it is as well it did. He gave me a standing order 6 weeks back. If anyone came for the late Queen's portraits on anything short of the King's hand or his own person, I was to keep them up and say those exact words." Renford was quiet a moment. "Did he now?" He rubbed his face. "And I suppose you've nothing in writing." I am not a man who lies to his captain, but I had, in the space of one afternoon, learned something about the palace I had somehow gone 30 years without truly understanding. That a thing on paper in the wrong hands is not a shield but a weapon that can be taken and turned. If I gave Renford the card, Renford, fair, tired, middle-standing Renford would feel obliged to send it up the chain for safekeeping, and it would land on a desk in the Queen Consort's household, and it would never be seen again, and I would have surrendered the one solid thing I had. So I did the second hardest thing I did that week. I looked my captain in the eye and I said, "Nothing I can produce, sir," which was true in the letter and a betrayal in the spirit, and I have never been sorry for it since. Renford sighed. "Then you understand the position you've put me in. I've the Queen Consort's household telling me my sergeant is a mutineer, and I've your word about a verbal order from a prince whose 9 days ride away in the forests." 9 days, sergeant. He said it the way Morwenna had said it, and I understood that she had chosen those 9 days on purpose, that the whole shape of her plan was built on the prince being too far to reach. 9 days is a long time for a captain to sit between the Queen Consort and a stubborn sergeant. "Yes, sir. I could take you off the gallery post, reassign you to the outer gate, clean, quiet, no more trouble." He watched me. "That would end it." "It would, sir. And by tonight there'd be some other man on that post who'd never had the prince's order, and the portraits would come down in the morning, and the prince would come home to find them gone, and his word broken by the very guard he trusted to keep it." I paused. "You'd not be ending the trouble, sir. You'd be handing it to the Queen Consort and calling it peace." I saw the words land because Renford was not a stupid man, only a frightened one, and there is a difference between the two that most frightened men would give a great deal to hide. He looked at the paper on his desk for a long moment. Then he pushed it aside, not away, just aside, and he said, "You'll stand your post, for now. I'll not reassign you today, a beat. But hear me, sergeant. If this goes wrong, if the prince disowns this order when he's home, or if it turns out you've got the wrong end of some royal quarrel, I'll not be able to save you. I'll not even be able to save myself. You're standing on a card you won't show me, and if the card's not real, you'll take me down with you." He held my eye. "Tell me plainly, is the card real?" "It's real, sir, and it's mine to stand on, and I'll stand on it alone. Whatever falls, falls on me." That at least seemed to ease him, because a frightened man in the middle wants above all to be told the fall will not reach him, and I had told him that, and it was even true. I meant to take the whole weight myself. I did not yet know how much weight there would be. The second tear came the next day, and it came wearing the face of a friend. Lord Cassius was the Queen Consort's son by her first marriage, a smooth young man of the court, all easy laughter and good tailoring, who had a way of making every man he spoke to feel briefly like the most interesting fellow in the room. He came to the long gallery in the late morning, alone, hands clasped behind his back, strolling as if by happy accident, and he stopped beside me and looked up at the great state portrait of Isolde crowned as though seeing it for the first time. "Magnificent, isn't it?" he said. "The old queen, I never knew her, of course, before my mother's time." He tilted his head. "You knew her, though. You'd have stood these corridors when she was alive." "I did, my lord." "What was she like?" He asked it lightly, warmly, the way you draw out a man you mean to like. "Kind." "They say she was kind." And I nearly answered, because it is a rare thing to be asked about Isolde by anyone in that court, and there was a whole warm well of things I might have said. How she learned the guards' names, all of them, when no one required her to. How she sent broth to the gatehouse the winter the fever went through. How she stopped once, in that very gallery, to ask a young sergeant whether his mother had recovered, and remembered to ask again a month later. I nearly poured all of it out to Lord Cassius's kind, upturned face. And then I saw the shape of it. He had not come to remember Isolde. He had come to open me, gently, with warmth instead of threats, to find the seam where I could be worked loose. His mother had tried the cold, and it had not moved me. Now the sun was trying the warmth, and warmth is a great deal more dangerous, because a threatened man braces and a flattered man opens. "She was kind, my lord," I said, and I said no more, and I put my eyes back on the far window. Cassius let a small silence go by. Then he laughed softly, not unkindly, and I understood that he had felt the seam close and had decided to respect it, at least for today. "You're a hard man to make a friend of, Sergeant," he said. "I mean that as a compliment. Most men in this palace would have talked for an hour to be liked by me." He turned to go, then paused. "I'll tell you something, guard to guard. I was a soldier once too, briefly, before my mother decided the court suited me better. So I know what a standing order is, and I'll give you a soldier's honest counsel for nothing because I think you're a decent man in a bad spot." He lowered his voice, and for the first time the warmth thinned and something truer showed under it. "My mother does not lose. She has never lost. Not to a rival, not to a courtier, and certainly not to a corridor. You've made her look small in front of servants, and she'll not forgive that, and she has 9 days and the whole weight of the household to make you pay for it. The prince may come home and back you, or he may come home and find the whole thing tidied away, and decide it's not worth a war with his father's wife over 3 paintings. Princes are practical, Sergeant, when the cost gets high enough. I not stake my children's roof on a boy's gratitude." It was, I thought, the most honest thing anyone said to me all week, and the most dangerous, because it was true and it was meant kindly, and it was still, underneath, exactly what his mother had sent him to say. He inclined his head, and he strolled away down the gallery, and his footsteps faded, and I stood there with his true and terrible counsel ringing in my ears, a boy's gratitude. And I looked at the far portrait, at Isolde looking at her son, and I thought, it is not gratitude I'm standing on. It is his word. And a man's word is a thing you keep whether or not it profits you, or it was never worth anything to begin with. But I will not pretend the counsel did not shake me. It shook me all afternoon. On the third day, Morwenna came back with her piece of paper, exactly as she had promised, and I understood at once that the corridor game had ended and a far larger one had begun. She did not come with servants and poles this time. She came with a clerk of the household in black, and the clerk carried a folded document with a heavy wax seal, and behind them, keeping a careful distance, came 2 men of the palace's own inner guard, not my company, but the household's private detail, men whose wages Morwenna herself signed. That was the piece of it that made my mouth go dry. She had not merely brought a paper. She had brought the beginning of force. "Sergeant," she was pleasant again, restored, the small defeat of the first morning polished away. "I did tell you I'd return with proper authority. Here it is." She nodded to the clerk, who unfolded the document and held it up so that I might see, though not touch, the dense clerkly hand and the seal at the foot. "An order of the household under my seal as Queen Consort, directing the removal of the 3 portraits in the north gallery to the west stores, on grounds of the rehanging of the wing, countersigned by the controller of the household, sealed and lawful." She let that settle. "You'll observe there are 2 names on it and 1 seal, and every one of them outranks a card in a boy's handwriting that you cannot even produce. Now, Sergeant, my clerk will read you the order, and then my men will take the portraits down, and you will stand your post and watch it done, and that will be the end of it, and I will even, in my generosity, forget that you were ever difficult. Read it." The clerk began to read. It was a real document. I could hear that it was real in the dry legal joints of it, the whereas and the be it therefore directed. Morwenna had gone to her writing desk, and she had built, in 3 days, a lawful-looking wall of authority, and she had brought 2 armed men to stand behind it, and she had chosen her ground well, because now if I refused, I was not refusing a spoken order in a corridor. I was refusing a sealed instrument of the household, in front of witnesses, and that is the kind of refusal they hang the word mutiny on and mean it. I let the clerk read to the end. Then I said into the silence, "Ma'am, may I ask one question about the order?" Morwenna's eyes narrowed a fraction. "You may ask." "Whose hand set the seal, yours or the king's?" The question landed differently than she expected. I saw it. "Mine," she said. "As Queen Consort, the king is unwell and does not sign household minutiae. That is precisely why the Queen Consort seal exists, to act in the ordinary running of the house without troubling him." "Then I'm sorry, ma'am, but the order I hold answers your order exactly." I kept my voice level, kept my eyes on her, and I laid it out plain because there were witnesses now and I wanted every one of them to hear it clearly. The Crown Prince's standing order names 2 authorities, and only 2 that can move these portraits, the king in his own hand or the Crown Prince in person. Your seal is neither. It is the Queen Consort's seal, and it is lawful for the running of the house, and it does not reach these 3 frames, because a higher order has already spoken over them and said so by name. I paused. "If the king signs in his own hand, they come down within the hour and I'll carry them to the stores myself. If the prince comes home and countermands his own word, the same. But your seal, ma'am, however lawful for the china and the coal, does not command me here, and your men will not take these down while I stand this post." It was very quiet. The 2 household guards behind her shifted, and I looked past Morwenna to them, men of my own trade if not my company, and I said to them, evenly, the thing that had to be said. "Lads, you know what a standing order is. If you lay hands on these portraits, you're breaking a higher order than the one that sent you, on the word of the Queen Consort's seal against the word of the crown itself, and when this shakes out, and it will shake out, you'll be the men who did it. I'll not raise a hand to you, but I'll stand here and I'll name you, and you'll each have to decide whether these 3 paintings are worth your own service." I put my eyes back on Morwenna. "That's the whole of it, ma'am. I can't be moved and I won't move them, and now your own men have to choose." I had turned her force back on itself, and she knew it. The 2 household guards did not step forward. They looked at the floor, at the paper, at each other. Anywhere but at me, which is where men look when they have decided not to do a thing but haven't the courage to say so out loud. And Morwenna, who was many things but never a fool, saw in one glance that she could not make them act without a scene that would echo through the whole palace, and that a scene was the one thing her plan could not survive, because a scene meant witnesses, and witnesses meant the story reaching the king's rooms and reaching the prince. So she folded the moment away, smooth as the drawer, and she smiled the very cold smile, and she said, "You are a remarkably foolish man, Sergeant, and I have been remarkably patient. That ends today." She took the document from the clerk and held it a moment. "I will have this order enforced. Not by these two, you've unmanned them, well done, but by men who don't share your tender feelings, and by an order this palace cannot argue with. You have made me go higher than I wished to. Remember when it comes that you chose it." And she turned and left, the clerk scurrying, the two guards falling in behind her with their eyes still down, and the long gallery emptied again and left me standing among the dead. That was the midpoint of the thing, though I did not know to call it that then. Up to that morning it had been a matter between a queen and a sergeant, standing very still, could hold it. After that morning it stopped being about me at all. Because the next day she did not come for the portraits, she came for the children. I do not mean she harmed them. I want that plain, and I will keep it plain, because in the telling of hard stories it is easy to let the shadow grow larger than the thing. She did not lift a hand to any child in that palace, and I never once feared she would. What she did was quieter and, in its way, colder. The three young ones of the house, Malin, who was 9 and grave, and Torin, who was 11 and watchful, and little Bram, who was 6 and afraid of the dark end of every corridor, were the late queen's grandchildren by blood, Rowan's own, and they had grown up, all three, walking the long gallery on their way to the schoolroom in the east wing, and stopping, every one of them without being told, at the far portrait by the door, the one of Isolde with the boy on her knee. It was a thing they did. Malin had told me once, in the grave way she had, that she liked to say good morning to grandmother's picture, because her father said grandmother would have liked her, and it seemed rude to walk past someone who would have liked you without a word. On the 4th morning, a schoolroom attendant I did not know came and stood in the gallery, and when the 3 children came through on their way to lessons and slowed at the far portrait as they always did, the attendant said briskly, "Along now, we don't dawdle at pictures. The Queen Consort has asked that you take the east passage from now on and not the gallery." And she began, gently but firmly, to shepherd them toward a side door that would take them the long way round and never past Isolde at all. Malin stopped, 9 years old, and she stopped, and she looked at the attendant, and then she looked at the far portrait, and then, I will remember this until I die, she looked at me. She did not say anything. She was too well raised and too careful for that. But she looked at me, the grave gray eyes of her, and the look said, as plain as any spoken order I ever took, "They are trying to take grandmother away, and you are the guard, and guards keep things safe so." And that was the morning the whole matter changed its weight, and became something I would have stood in front of an army to hold. I broke a small rule that morning, and I have never regretted it. A guard on post does not speak to those he guards unless spoken to first. But I looked at Malin and I said quietly, so the attendant would not quite catch it, "Good morning, Your Highness. Grandmother's picture is right where it's always been. It's not going anywhere." And I saw her shoulders come down half an inch, the way a child's do when a grown person they've decided to trust has told them the thing they needed to hear, and she said, "Good morning, Sergeant," with great dignity, and she went and said her good morning to the portrait before the attendant could stop her, and then she let herself be led off to the east passage with her brothers, and at the door she looked back once, and I gave her the smallest nod, the one that means I have this. That is the moment I stopped being afraid of the cart with my daughter's things on it. It did not go away. But it stopped being the biggest thing in the corridor. There is a particular freedom that comes when a man finds something he will not trade at any price. It is a hard freedom, and it costs, but once you have it, the threats that used to reach your bones just slide off, because they are all bidding in a currency you no longer spend. The Princess Ilara came to me that afternoon. She was the prince's cousin, Isolde's niece by the old alliance, a grown woman of the house with children of her own, and a spine that the court both feared and needed. She came to the gallery quietly, no clerk, no retinue, and she stood beside me and looked up at the state portrait for a while before she spoke. "They tell me," she said, "that a sergeant of the guard has been refusing the Queen Consort's orders for 3 days over my aunt's paintings." She glanced at me. "Is that man you?" "It is, ma'am." "On what authority?" "The Crown Prince's, ma'am, a standing order." She was quiet, then low. "I loved my aunt. There are perhaps 4 people left in this palace who did, out loud, and I am one, and Rowan is one, and those 3 children are learning to be, and everyone else has found it more convenient to forget her fast so the new queen needn't be reminded she's the second." She looked at the far portrait, the one of Isolde and the boy. "Morwenna has gone to the king, Sergeant. I want you to know that so you're not blindsided. She's gone to Alaric's sick room, where he lies too weak to walk the length of this gallery himself and see what's being fought over, and she's told him, I don't know what she's told him, that his household is in disorder, that a mutinous guard is defying the crown, that she needs his authority to restore order in his own house. And a sick man, a tired man, a man who trusts his wife, may sign a thing put in front of him by the one person who sits by his bed all day without ever fully understanding what he's signing. She let that sit. If she comes back with the king's own hand on that order, Sergeant, truly his hand, truly his, will you still refuse?" And there it was, the false dawn's dark twin, the one turn of the screw I had told everyone would end it. If the king signs in his own hand, they come down within the hour. I had said it to Morwenna. I had said it to myself. It was the honest limit of my stand, because the king's hand is the top of the whole order of things, and a guard who refuses the king is not a principled man. He is a lunatic. And now Ilara was telling me that Morwenna might get that hand not by right, but by trickery, by leaning on a sick man in a dim room, and the question hung there, and it was a real one. I thought about it a long moment. Then I said, "If the king signs in his own hand, ma'am, knowing what he signs, I'll obey it. He's the king. That's not weakness in me, that's the whole thing I stand for. But," and here I found the edge I hadn't known I had until my tongue found it. "The prince's order names the king's own hand, which means the prince himself set the king above his own word deliberately. He didn't say, 'No one shall move these but me.' He said the king or me. He left his father a door. So if the king truly, knowingly wants these portraits down, then the prince has already agreed it in advance, and there's no conflict, and I obey. But if the king's hand is on that paper because a sick man was told a lie by his own wife's mouth, then it is not the king commanding, ma'am. It is Morwenna commanding, using the king's hand like a stamp. And I hope, that if I could get one clear question to His Majesty, one plain question, he would tell me which it was. That's the only thread I'll hold to. Not that I'll refuse the king. That I'll try, with everything I have, to make sure it's the king I'm refusing and not a lie wearing his signature." Ilara looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face shifted, and she said quietly, "You're a more dangerous man than my cousin-in-law understands. She thinks she's fighting a stubborn soldier. She's fighting a man who's thought the whole thing through to the bottom." She drew a breath. "Then here is what I can do. I cannot get you into the king's sick room. She controls the door, and I control nothing there. But I can send a rider, a fast one, my own, off the household books where she can't see him go. I can send to the northern lodge and tell Rowan to come home now, tonight, riding through the dark, because his mother's memory is being torn off the wall while his father lies too weak to stop it. 9 days, she counted on. A rider who kills 3 horses getting there, and the prince who rides back through the frost, that might be 4. It's the best I have." "Send him, ma'am," I said, "and I'll hold the 4 days." She nodded once and she was gone, and for the first time since the frost came I had something more than a card over my heart. I had an ally with a horse. I needed one, because the next morning brought the worst of it. Morwenna came back on the 5th day, and she came, this time, with the king's own hand. I knew at the moment I saw the document, because it was different from the last, a smaller sheet, and at the foot of it, below the clerkly text, was a signature I had seen on 100 proclamations in 30 years, the long looping A of Alaric unmistakable, the king's own hand set to an order that these 3 portraits be removed to the West Stores forthwith. And beside the signature, so I could not pretend the ink was old or false, the wax was fresh and unbroken, and the date on it was that very morning. "There, Sergeant," Morwenna said, and she was not gloating, which was somehow worse. She was quiet and certain and almost gentle, the way you are gentle with a beaten thing. "The king, in his own hand, this morning. You told me yourself, you told all these witnesses, that if the king signed in his own hand, you'd carry the portraits to the stores yourself. Here it is, the top of the whole order you live by. Now," she held it out not to me but toward the wall, toward the far portrait of Isolde and her boy, "take them down." And I will tell you honestly that for the space of several heartbeats I believed it was over, because she was right. I had said it, in front of witnesses, with my own mouth. If the king signs in his own hand, they come down. That was the true limit of my stand, the honest floor beneath my defiance. And now she was standing on it, and it held her weight. And every rule I had ever served said that when the king's own hand commands, the guard obeys or the guard is a traitor, and there is no third thing. So I did not refuse, not at first. I want that clear, because it is the part that later mattered most. I did not look at the king's signature and say no. I looked at it and I studied it, and I let the whole gallery watch me study it, and then I asked the one question I had promised Alara I would ask. "Ma'am, when the king signed this morning, did he read it? In full? Did he know it was these 3, by name, the state portrait and the young one, and the one of his first wife with his son on her knee? Did he know that? Or was it read to him quickly, in a dim room, as an order to restore order in the North Gallery, among a stack of other papers, by a hand he trusts?" Morwenna went still. It was a very small stillness, gone in an instant, smoothed over at once. But I had spent 5 days learning to read the twitch of a thing before she could shut the drawer on it, and I saw it, and so, I think, did 1 or 2 of the others in the gallery. "He signed it," she said. "The hand is his. That is all a guard needs to know. You are not the king's confessor, Sergeant. You do not get to interrogate what his majesty understood. He is the king. He signed. You obey." "He is the king," I agreed, "and I'll obey the king." But this, I did not touch the paper. I would not give her the chance to say I'd snatched at it. This is the king's hand on a paper the king may not have understood. And there is a difference, ma'am, between obeying the king and obeying his signature, and the whole of my trade is knowing that difference, because a signature can be got by a lie and the king himself cannot. So I'll tell you what I'll do, and it's the fairest thing I have. I will not take these portraits down on this paper. But I will not defy it either. I'll send it, this exact paper, up to the household's own justice, to someone who is neither yours nor mine, with one written question attached. Did His Majesty know these were his first wife's portraits when he signed? If the answer comes back yes, he knew, and he wished it, they come down within the hour and I'll carry them myself and take whatever punishment you like for the delay. But until that one question is answered, these 3 stay on the wall, because a guard who lets a queen tear down the dead on the strength of a signature she may have tricked out of a sick man is not a loyal guard, ma'am. He is a coward hiding behind ink. I had, without quite planning it, found the one move that Morwenna could not simply crush. She could threaten a sergeant. She could bring a sealed order. She could even bring the king's hand. But she could not, in front of a gallery of witnesses, refuse to let a single plain question go up to a neutral authority, because refusing that question was the same as confessing that she was afraid of its answer. And she was afraid of its answer. I saw that too. For a long moment I thought she might do it anyway, might simply command her men to take the portraits and be damned to the question. And if she had, I do not know what I would have done, because there is only so much one sergeant can do against men who have decided to obey. But there were witnesses now. There were always more witnesses each day. The story had leaked out of the gallery and into the whole palace, and that morning there were 3 or 4 of the household staff loitering at the far end who had no business there except to see how it went. And Morwenna, who understood witnesses better than anyone alive, understood that if she ordered force in front of them and it later came out that the king had been tricked, she would be finished, not merely embarrassed, finished, the kind of finished a consort does not recover from. So she folded it away one more time. "Send your question then," she said, and her voice was ice now, all the gentleness gone. "Send it up the household justice and let them tell you what a fool you've made of yourself. You have bought your dead queen, what? Another day, too. I have the king's hand, sergeant. There is no higher hand but the prince's, and the prince is in the forests. When your question comes back, and it will come back, you will have nothing left to hide behind, and I will come with men who do not care about witnesses, and these 3 will be off this wall by nightfall, and you will be off your post by morning, and no rider and no princess and no card over your heart will save you." She turned. At the door she looked back, and for the first time she let me see the whole of her hatred, plain, unguarded. "You should not have made this personal, sergeant. Now it is. And I do not lose things I have made personal." She was gone, and the gallery let out its breath, and one of the loitering staff, the older servant from the very first morning, the one who would not look at the portraits, came halfway down the hall and said, "Lo, I'll carry your question up, sergeant, if you like, up to the justice's office, and I'll carry it honest, and I'll wait for the answer, and I'll bring it straight back to you and no one else. There's a few of us in the house who'd rather serve the old queen's memory than the new queen's spite, and we've been waiting 5 days for someone to give us a way to help." He almost smiled. "You've given us one. Write your question." "I'll run it." I wrote it that hour, on a leaf torn from the watchbook, in my plain sergeant's hand. Did His Majesty the King know, when he set his hand this morning to the order for the North Gallery, that the 3 portraits named therein are those of the late Queen Isolde, the state portrait, the young portrait, and the portrait of her late Majesty with the Crown Prince as a boy? And is it His Majesty's own knowing wish that they be removed to the stores? I signed it and I folded it, and I gave it to the old servant, whose name, I learned that day at last, was Corbin, and Corbin tucked it into his coat and went off up the palace at a pace that belied his years, and I stood my post and waited, and the portrait stayed on the wall, and the frost ticked in the glass. That was the 5th day. The answer did not come that night, nor the 6th morning, and I understood why. Morwenna held the door to the king's rooms, and the household justice could not get his one plain question past that door to the one man who could answer it. My move had been good, but it had run into the same wall everything ran into. She controlled the sick room, and while she controlled the sick room, no honest question could reach the king, and no honest answer could come back out. And then, on the 6th day, the door to the king's rooms opened from the inside, and out of it came the one person in the whole palace that Morwenna could neither command nor bribe nor frighten, and everything began, at last, to turn. Her name was Adela, and she was the king's sister. She was older than Alaric by 3 years, and she had never married, and she had spent a long life being the one member of the house that no faction could ever quite absorb, because she wanted nothing that any of them had to give. She had no throne to gain, and no favor to seek, and no fear of losing a place she had never grasped for, and that made her, in a palace full of the ambitious, very nearly the only free person in it. She had been away in the country when the frost came. She had returned, Ilara later told me, the moment Ilara's whisper reached her, for Ilara had sent word to Adela the same hour she sent the rider to Rowan, casting 2 lines into the dark and hoping one would catch. Adela came out of the king's rooms and down the state stair, and into the long gallery with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has never in her life had to walk fast to be attended to. And she came straight to me, and she looked at the 3 portraits, and then she looked at me, and she said without preamble, "You're the sergeant." I am, ma'am. The one who's been telling my brother's wife no for 6 days over my sister-in-law's face on a wall. I am, ma'am. Good, said Adela. Then you and I are going to fix this today because I have just spent an hour in my brother's sick room, and I am very, very angry, and I would like to point that anger somewhere useful. She turned and looked up at the state portrait of Isolde, and her hard old face softened by a fraction. She was the best of the lot of us, you know, Isolde, kinder than she had any need to be in a place that punishes kindness. I told her once she'd get herself hurt being so soft in a house of knives, and she said, I've never forgotten it, she said. Adela, if the knives win, then let me be the thing they had to cut through and not one of the knives. Adela was quiet a moment. So no, they're not coming down, not while I'm alive and standing. Now, tell me exactly what has happened from the first morning and leave nothing out, and I will tell you what I found upstairs. I told her, all of it plain, the poles and the seal and the king's hand and the question Corbin had carried up and could not get answered because the sick-room door was shut. And Adela listened without a single interruption, which is a rare and powerful thing in a listener, and when I was done, she nodded slowly. Now I'll tell you what I found, she said. My brother is ill, Sergeant, but he is not gone. His body has failed faster than his mind. He tires, and he sleeps a great deal, and for some days now he has signed whatever is put before him because his wife sits by his bed and reads the papers to him in her own voice and tells him what they are, and he trusts her, as a sick man trusts the one who nurses him. This morning she brought him a paper and read it to him as an order to settle a disturbance among the guard in the north wing. My love, some sergeant making trouble, just put your hand to it and I'll deal with the rest. And he signed it. He signed an order to settle a disturbance. He did not know, he swore to me not half an hour ago, and my brother has never lied to me in 70 years. He did not know that the paper named Isolde's portraits. He did not know he had signed to have his first wife's face taken off the wall. When I read the actual words of it to him, the words you sent up in your question, when I said the portrait of Isolde with Rowan on her knee, Sergeant, my brother wept. A sick old man in a bed wept because he had been made to sign against the memory of a woman he loved and never knew he'd done it. The gallery was very quiet. Corbin, who had come to stand at a respectful distance, had his cap in his hands. So here is what we're going to do, said Adela, and her voice had iron in it now, the family iron, the thing Alaric had and Isolde had and this old woman had in fuller measure than any of them. That order is void. Not because a sergeant refused it, you were right to, and I'll see it's remembered, but a sergeant's refusal is a thin reed, and I'll not have this rest on a thin reed. It's void because it was got by fraud upon the person of the king. My brother has told me so with his own mouth, and I have witnesses to his telling, 3 of his own physicians, who were in the room and heard him say he never knew what he'd signed. Consent obtained by lying to a sick man is not consent, and an order signed on that consent is not an order. It is a forgery in everything but the hand that made it. And I will say so in front of the whole house, and I will make it stick. She looked at me. Your question, Sergeant, was the finest thing anyone in this palace has done in 6 days. You didn't refuse the king. You asked whether it was truly the king, and that one question is the crack the whole of her scheme falls through. Because now the question is not, will a guard obey the crown? She'd have won that. The question is, did the Queen Consort deceive her dying husband to spite a dead woman? And she cannot win that. No one can win that. She'll say I've slandered her, I said. She'll say the king knew fine well, and I've cast doubt on his own signature to save my own skin. She'll say all of that, Adela agreed, and it won't matter because there is one thing coming that will settle it past all her saying. Alara's rider reached the northern lodge yesterday at dusk. The prince rode out within the hour. She almost smiled. He'll be here tomorrow, Sergeant. And when Rowan walks into this gallery, we will have not one authority but 2, the king, restored to knowing what was done in his name, and the prince, whose standing order started this whole stand, and against those 2 together, standing side by side, The Queen Consort's seal is a scrap of wax. She put a hand briefly on the frame of the far portrait, the one of Isolde and the boy, the lightest touch. Hold your post one more night, Sergeant, one more night, and then we end it in the open in front of everyone, the way she never wanted it ended. I held my post one more night. It was the longest of my life, and the coldest, and I did not sleep, and twice in the small hours I heard footsteps come down the gallery and stop, and both times it was only some servant of the house come to stand a while in the dark near Isolde's portrait, for word had gone all through the palace by now, and the ordinary people of it, the ones who fetch and carry and are never asked their opinion of anything, had begun to come, quietly, in ones and twos. To stand a moment near the paintings, a sergeant was guarding with his career. They did not speak to me, mostly. But one old laundress stopped on her way past before dawn and said, "She sent broth to my sister when the fever came. The old queen. No one asked her to." And she looked at the portrait a moment, and then she looked at me and she said, "You keep them up, son." And she went on, and I stood there in the dark with my eyes stinging, and I thought, this is what Morwenna never understood. She thought she was fighting a sergeant. She was fighting everyone who was ever shown a kindness by a woman who had no reason to bother, and there are more of us than she ever counted. The prince came home at noon the next day. I heard him before I saw him, the courtyard below the gallery, windows filling with the noise of a hard-ridden horse, and a man swinging down off it before it had fully stopped, and voices, and then boots on the state stair taking the steps two at a time, which princes do not do, which no one had done in that dignified old palace in living memory. He had ridden through the better part of 2 days and 1 whole night, changing horses at post houses, sleeping in the saddle, and he came into the long gallery still in his riding clothes, mud to the knee, his face gray with exhaustion and something harder than exhaustion, and he did not stop to be greeted. He came straight down the 200 paces of that gallery past all the dead faces of his house to the far door, to the portrait of his mother with himself as a boy on her knee, and he stopped in front of it. And for a moment the crown prince of the realm just stood there and looked at his mother's face, and no one in that gallery said a word. Then he turned and he saw me and he came to me, and he said in a voice rubbed raw by the cold and the road, "Sergeant, is it still up?" "All three." "All three, sir." My own voice was not steady. "They never came down, not one of them, not for 6 days." Something went out of him then, some terrible tension he had carried the whole ride, and for just a moment I thought the prince might weep in front of the whole hall, the way his father had wept in the sick room. He did not. He mastered it, but he reached out and he gripped my shoulder hard, the way a man grips another man when there are no words that will carry the weight, and he said low, just for me, "You held." Everyone told me on the road that they'd surely be down by now, that no sergeant would stand against her for 6 days, that I should prepare myself to come home to bare walls. And you held. He drew a breath. "Do you know why I gave you that order, Sergeant? All those weeks ago?" "No, sir. I've wondered every hour of the last 6 days, but no." "Then I'll tell you in front of everyone, because it's time it was said in the open." And Rowan turned, still gripping my shoulder, and raised his voice so that the whole gallery, the household staff, the loitering witnesses, Corbin, Princess Alara who had come down when she heard the courtyard, and old Adela standing straight-backed by the state portrait, so that all of them would hear. "When my mother was dying," said the prince, "she was not afraid. I sat with her at the end and she was calm, and she made me promise her only one thing, not a throne, not vengeance on anyone. One thing. She said, 'Rowan, when I am gone they will want to tidy me away. It is what palaces do. The dead are inconvenient to the living, and a first wife is inconvenient to a second, and one day someone will decide that my face on a wall is in the way of the future, and they will take me down quietly when no one is looking, and in a year no one will remember I was ever here at all.' And she took my hand and she said, 'I don't mind for my own sake. I'll be past minding.' But your children, Rowan, my grandchildren, they'll grow up in these halls, and I want them to know, walking to their lessons, that there was a woman here who loved them before they were born. I want them to have my face to say good morning to. Promise me you'll keep me on the wall, not for me, for them." The prince's voice did not break, but it came very close. And I promised her. And I knew, even as I promised, that I would not always be here to keep it, that I would be away at the lodge, at the wars, wherever the crown sends its heir, and that the day someone came to tidy my mother away, I might be 9 days' ride from this wall and unable to lift a hand. So I did the only thing a man can do who cannot always guard the thing he loves. I gave the guarding to someone who would be here when I could not. I gave it to the post itself, to whatever man stood this gallery. I gave it to you, sergeant, and to every sergeant who will ever stand here after you. And I wrote it down, and I signed it, and I trusted that the discipline of the guard, the one thing in this whole palace of shifting loyalties that does not shift, would keep my promise to my mother when I could not keep it myself. He let go of my shoulder and stepped back, and now he raised his voice fully, and it filled the gallery, and it was not the voice of a tired young man off a horse anymore. It was the voice of the heir of the realm. "So when this guard told the Queen Consort, 'I have orders from the Crown Prince,' he was not being insolent, and he was not making trouble, and he was not, whatever she has told my father, defying the crown. He was keeping a dying woman's last wish, on my authority, exactly as I charged him to. He was doing the one thing I could not be here to do. And I would rather," his voice rang off the old oak, "I would rather this house lost every jewel in its vaults than lose the kind of man who will stand 6 days in a cold corridor, against threats to his livelihood and his family, to keep a promise made to a woman he had no reason left to serve, because she was kind to him once long ago, when no one required her to be." And into that silence, from the far end of the gallery, came the sound of skirts, and Morwenna arrived at last for the reckoning she had built herself, and did not yet understand she had lost. She had heard, of course, that the prince was home. The whole palace had heard the horse in the courtyard. But she came in still carrying herself like a woman who holds the winning card, because she believed she did. She had the king's own signature, and in her reckoning the king's hand beat the prince's word, and she meant to end this in front of Rowan himself, to show him that his little standing order was a scrap of sentiment his father had overruled, and that his sergeant was a fool who had wasted 6 days and a career on nothing. "Rowan," she said, and her voice was warm, maternal, the voice of a stepmother greeting a boy who has ridden a long way. "You should have sent word you were coming. You look half dead. Come, this ugly little business is settled. There's no need for you to trouble yourself with it. Your father signed the order himself in his own hand this very week. The portraits go to the stores. The gallery is rehung, and this stubborn sergeant, a cool glance at me, will be dealt with for the disorder he's caused. It's done, my dear. Go and rest." "Is it done, mother?" said Rowan, and there was something in the quiet of it that should have warned her. "Show me the order, then, the one my father signed." She had the document with her. Of course she did. She had brought it to wave in his face, and she produced it and held it out, the king's looping a plane at the foot of it, and Rowan took it and read it slowly all the way through, while the gallery held its breath. And then he looked up and he said, "This is my father's hand." "It is," said Morwenna, "and I heard the beginning of triumph in it." "So the question," said Rowan, "is only whether he knew what he was signing." He turned. "Aunt Adela." And Adela stepped forward, and behind her, filing in through the state door, came 3 grave men in the dark robes of the king's physicians, and the triumph died in Morwenna's face as she watched them come, because she understood all at once exactly what a room full of the king's own physicians meant. "My brother," said Adela, in the ringing, unhurried voice of a woman who has waited her whole life to say a true thing at the right moment, "signed this paper believing it to be an order to settle a disturbance among the guard in the north wing." Those were the words read to him. "By you, Morwenna." He did not know it named Isolde's portraits. He did not know he was signing to have his first wife's face taken from this wall. When I read him the true contents of the paper, the actual words not 2 days ago in the presence of these 3 physicians who are here to swear to it, my brother wept and said, and I quote him exactly, "I never knew. God forgive me, I never knew what she put before me." She let the silence stretch. These 3 men heard him say it. They will say so before the whole house, before any court you like. The king did not order Isolde's portraits removed, Morwenna. He was tricked into signing his name to your spite, and that is not an order. It is a fraud upon the person of the crown, and it is the gravest thing anyone in this palace has done in a generation, and you did it. For the first time in 6 days, Morwenna had no drawer to shut. I watched it happen. I watched the smooth, certain, endlessly composed face of the Queen Consort come apart at the seams, not into rage. She was too clever for rage in that moment, but into the pale, still blankness of someone who has just felt the whole ground she stood on drop away at once. The seal, the clerk, the household guards, the king's hand, every weapon she had gathered had just been turned into the evidence against her, and she understood it, and there was nothing she could say, because the one thing she could not do was claim the king had knowingly ordered his own wife's memory torn down, for if she claimed that, she was calling him a liar in front of his physicians and his sister and his heir, and everyone in that gallery would know she was doing it to save herself. "Rowan," she said at last, and it was the first time her voice had ever failed to fill a room. "Rowan, I only wish to the children, it isn't healthy for them, growing up in the shadow of a dead." "Don't," said Rowan, just the one word quiet, and it stopped her utterly. "Don't speak of my children, or of my mother, in the same breath as your convenience. You lied to a dying man. You took his hand in your hands and you guided it to a paper you had lied to him about, so that you could tear my mother off this wall while I was too far away to stop you and he was too weak to know. And you did it not for the children, and not for the light in this gallery, and not for the health of the house. You did it because a first wife loved and remembered is a mirror you cannot bear to walk past, because it shows the house everything you are not." He handed the false order not back to her but to Adela, deliberately taking it out of her power. "This order is void. My father has already said so with his own mouth and will say so again in writing the moment he is strong enough to hold a pen, and until then his sister speaks for the truth of what he wants, witnessed by his physicians. The portraits stay, all 3, forever. That is my order given in person, and it is the king's true wish, and there is now no authority in this realm that can move them, because the only 2 that could, my father and I, have both said no." He looked at me then and he said, "Sergeant, your standing order is discharged, and discharged with honor. You may stand down from it. The guarding of my mother's memory is no longer only yours to carry alone. But the post remains, and every man who ever holds it will hold the same order after you, and I will see it written into the standing instructions of this gallery in ink that outlasts all of us." A pause, "and you will not stand down poorer for it. Whatever the Queen Consort threatened, your wage, your lodgings, your pension, your family's roof, is hereby placed beyond her reach and under my own protection, and doubled, and your name is going to the king the moment he wakes, as the man who kept his house honest when its own consort would have shamed it." Morwenna stood one moment longer in the silence of the gallery she had lost, among the faces of a house that would never again be entirely hers, and then she gathered what was left of her dignity, which was less than she had brought, and she turned, and she walked the 200 paces back up the long gallery alone. No clerk, no guards, no seal, past all the dead who had watched her fail, and she went out. And the gallery did not so much fall silent, as finally let out the breath it had been holding for 6 days. The king recovered in part. He never fully rose from his illness, but his mind came clear, and when it did, the first thing he asked to be carried to see, borne in a chair the length of the gallery he could no longer walk, was the far portrait of Isolde with Rowan as a boy on her knee. They set his chair before it, and he sat a long while, and he said, "So I was told by Corbin, who was there, only one thing. She'd have laughed at all this fuss." She was never one for fuss. And then quietly leave her where she is, where the children can find her. And he set his own hand, knowing this time exactly what he did, to a new order in the presence of his sister and his son, that the 3 portraits of the late Queen Isolde were to remain in the long gallery in perpetuity, and that no consort, chamberlain, or controller of the household, present or to come, had any authority to remove them, and that the guard of the gallery was charged with their protection as a standing duty of the post. He signed it Alaric, the long looping A, and this time no one had lied to him, and this time it was truly the king who commanded, and I have never in my life been so glad to obey an order. As for the Queen Consort, there was no great public downfall, no trial, no clatter of chains. The house does not air such things, and Adela was wise enough to know that a quiet ruin is more complete than a loud one. But Morwenna's seal was quietly stripped of its authority over anything but the smallest domestic matters. A controller she had trusted was dismissed. And she found, in the months that followed, that doors which had always opened for her had grown stiff, and that the household which had once scurried at her word now attended her with a correctness that had no warmth in it at all, because everyone in it now knew what she had tried to do to a dying man and a dead woman. And there is no punishment a palace deals more thoroughly than the slow cold of a house that has decided it no longer respects you. She kept her title and her rooms. She lost the thing she had actually wanted, which was to be the only queen anyone remembered, and she lost it forever, because after that winter Isolde's name was spoken more in that palace than it had been since her death, not less, as Morwenna had schemed, but more, for the whole house had learned the story of the 6 days, and a woman worth guarding for 6 cold days becomes, in the telling, unforgettable. I stood the long gallery for 4 more years until my own retirement, and I will tell you that in all that time not one soul, not the highest lord nor the greenest housemaid, ever again suggested that the 3 portraits come down. The children grew. Malin, grave Malin, took to stopping by my post each morning on her way to lessons, and telling me gravely, "Good morning, Sergeant. Grandmother's still there," as though delivering a report, and I would say, "She is, Your Highness," right where she belongs, and it became a thing between us, a small daily ceremony, the guarding of a memory handed down from a prince to a sergeant to a grave little girl who would one day be old enough to guard it herself. On my last day, when I stood down from the post for good, the prince, he was near to being king himself by then, came to the gallery to see me off, which he had no need to do. And he stood with me a last time in front of his mother's portrait, the one of her looking at the boy on her knee, and he said, "Do you remember what you told her, my stepmother, that first morning?" "I remember every word of it, sir. I've had cause to." "I have orders from the Crown Prince," he said, and he smiled, that tired old smile that had grown less tired over the years. 6 words. Do you know, Sergeant, in all my life, I don't think I was ever prouder of anything with my name attached to it than those 6 words in the mouth of a man I'd never have needed to give them to, if the world were only made of people who kept their promises without being told. He put his hand on my shoulder, one last time. "You were the person I gave the guarding to when I could not be here. And you guarded it, thank you. I have thought in the long years since about what it was I really stood for in that cold corridor. Not a queen, I served Isolde barely, and she was dead besides. Not a prince, Rowan could have found 100 men to stand a post. It was smaller than that, and larger. I stood for the plain idea that a promise made to the dying does not lapse when they are gone, that a kindness once given earns a debt that outlives the giver, and that the whole worth of a man in a uniform is that he will keep a word he was trusted with even when keeping it costs him everything and profits him nothing. Morwenna never understood that. She thought discipline was a leash you could yank. She never grasped that the same discipline that made me stand still for her insults was the exact thing that made me immovable against her orders, that it was all one thing, the stillness and the stand, and that a man who can be moved by a threat was never truly still to begin with. They are still on the wall, I'm told. All three. Isolde crowned and Isolde laughing and Isolde with her boy on her knee, looking at him and not at us, the way a mother does. And every morning some child of the house, and now some child of those children, stops on the way to lessons and says good morning to a woman they never met, who loved them before they were born, and who is right where she belongs. Because once, on the first morning of a frost, a prince kept a promise through a sergeant, and a sergeant kept it through 6 cold days, and neither of them, when it mattered, could be moved.